If you're new to the channel, I have a buddy named Dave that helps review games on our podcast, the aptly named Gaming Wisconsinbly podcast, available on this YouTube channel and Spotify. Dave loves these long and plodding old school RPGs from the early PC days. It's hard to find one that he really doesn't like, but he did tell me about one game he rented as a kid and hated. The game, well, it's Times of War for the original Nintendo. Personally, I've never played this one before, but picked it up during a trip to New York a couple years ago for around $60. The game is a pretty hard one to find, but I really like the box art. Has a classic D&D type of feel to it. Like Dave, I'm also a gigantic fan of RPGs, but my era is really the Super Nintendo to PS1 and beyond, so I haven't played too many of these old Apple, Amiga, or Commodore games. My first computer was in 1994, and the only game I had was Wolfenstein, which, was pretty awesome. Anyway, not to get too off tangent, I had Dave come over before we recorded our last podcast about Earthbound and Mario RPG to play through Times of War. Since I looked, and generally runs were in the time range of a couple hours at most. Was Times of War as bad as Dave remembered? Well, let's take a look. Times of War was released on the NES in October of 1988 by a company called Origin Systems. Origin Systems was known for making all those Ultimate games that seemed to churn out yearly for many different systems over the years before being shuttered by EA in 2004. I haven't yet played through any of the Ultimate games, but the reception on those is largely hit or miss, it seems. So what can I say about Times of War? Well, at first glance, it looks like a pretty in-depth top-down action RPG in the fantasy style of Dungeons & Dragons, as you see a lot in 1980s media. Kind of like Hydlide if you have beer goggles on, but with more polish. What Times of War actually is a talking simulator with the illusion of battling monsters and exploring dungeons. What does that mean exactly? Well, let's explore. First of all, you can choose between three classes: the Knight, the Valkyrie, or the Barbarian. What's the difference between these classes? Well, they look different. That's it. The Barbarian has that ass though. Once you get into the game, you're met with a ton of options, which make this seem like more of an in-depth game than it really is. You can talk, look, use items in your bag, pick up items, use items, or give items. They could have definitely simplified the menu system, but I'm assuming this is a holdover from the computer ports, but this is a more staple of similar games in the genre. There's also a candle meter which shows how much food you have, if that makes any sense. You can replenish food at the inns, and you die if the meter runs out. Realistically though, it takes a long time for that to happen, and the distances between towns and dungeons are pretty short, so as long as you replenish once in each town, that's probably good enough. There is a story to this game, but it's not well explained unless you have the manual or read a Wikipedia article. In short, there's a monarch from the kingdom of Elberoth that goes missing and everything has gone to hell due to it. I wonder who the missing monarch could be. The gist of this game is to simply say the correct things to the correct townsfolk. To begin, go north of the starting town and grab the knife. Realistically, it's the only weapon you'd want in the entire game. There is an axe later on, but you'll soon see why that doesn't matter. The woodsman in there tells you to go kill some orcs, so just go do it. This is honestly the hardest part of the game, as it's the only time you really need to fight anything. Fighting is really just throwing your weapon kinda like Zelda at any enemy that appears in your path. They take one or two hits and can drop either gold, health potions, or damaging scrolls. Eventually you'll get to the orc village where you can use the scroll or knife them to death. The rest of Times of War is super interesting. Give the urn the red orc dropped to a guy from the beginning. Next you'll go to the town called Trella and talk to the guy in the inn where you can buy the boots. Now you can outrun literally every enemy in the game, and you can forget about your attack button if you like, because you don't actually need to hit anything unless you need more gold for food. There's a castle which you must go to only at nighttime and kill some guards to grab a note. Go to a close by inn and hit a secret switch downstairs to open a room leading up to some guy on a throne and give him the note. And then go to the town of Hampton and talk to a guy in a jail cell. Go question another guy about holy water and then buy some from him. Finally, it's time to face off against the first big bad guy in this desert ruined dungeon. But you don't actually need to attack any enemies in here. Just navigate through the rooms and hit some switches to open new doors and areas until you finally find the big bad lich. Here's the interesting part. If you try to attack him, you die. If you sit there long enough, you die. but if you use the holy water here, he dies instantly. Super exciting stuff. From here, if you want to get saucy, you can go kill a giant near the mountains and get the ring, which I think turns you invisible, which to my knowledge you never actually need. Apparently there might be a secret village and a dragon or something which you can kill as well, but we didn't really check it out. I just happened to see it mentioned in a walkthrough. Whether or not that's in the NES version, I have no idea. But one of the first NPCs you talk to mentions it, so I imagine it's a thing? If you're not already mindlessly bored, now you can go ahead and finish the game. You need to go find the chime in Trella, which is just as easy as it was walking through the previous dungeon. Ignore everything here and just go pick it up. Finally, you go to the temple northeast of Trella, pick up a spear and find Abbott, the final boss of the game. Here you need to use the spear on him. If you accidentally click any other option than use, such as give, you die. It's really stupid. The ending cutscene honestly isn't that bad, it's just a bunch of text explaining the rest of the story of how awesome you are now, and it drops the main title of the game, which I always get a kick out of. Now, I didn't go super in depth on the story here because if you want to play the game for yourself, that's literally all there is to it, so I don't need to spoil it for you. The battle system, if you can call it that, is completely unnecessary after the first part of the game with the orcs. It's just walking around, talking to NPCs, and gathering some key items until the game ends. Speedruns of Times of War are sub 20 minutes, without any major game-breaking skips as far as I'm aware, which is pretty insane for an RPG. I wish there was more to discuss here, but there's not, so let's skip right to the final grading. The graphics are fine, actually they're pretty competent, but not special. The music is super generic and forgettable, but not like awful or anything. It fits the game, I suppose. The theme that plays while you're in a house actually reminds me of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I don't know if that's a good thing. The menu system sucks ass. It's overly cumbersome and easy to press the wrong thing, which can lead to hilarious deaths against bosses or accidentally stabbing NPCs. Chatting with NPCs is a tedious process and should be simpler. The food system is ultimately pointless and the game could easily do without it. The combat isn't bad or anything, but again, there's really no need for its existence once you buy the boots early on in the game, so you can skip just about every enemy afterwards unless you need some coins. So my final thoughts, well, this is probably one of the most forgettable NES games out there. The replay value is non-existent unless you're looking for some brain-dead game to speedrun. The fun factor isn't there either. As for things that would have made Times of War better, maybe add more enemy types that are dangerous, or have projectiles or something. As with all these old school RPGs, I'd really love to see an in-game overworld map option to see where you're going, instead of having a map on the side that came with the game, because, even back then, those were commonly not even included in rentals, and the internet didn't exist, so it's really hard to figure out what you're doing. This also has one of my biggest pet peeves in gaming, for not having signs on buildings such as ones for the inn. It'd be really nice to figure out which building is which every town you go, I would say it's not as annoying to figure out as dungeon magic on the NES, but I'll never understand why they weren't added in some of these old school RPGs. There are no spells to learn and no leveling system to speak of in the shell of an RPG adventure. Times of War looks like it should be a solid game based on presentation, but there's just no filling in this pie. For these reasons, and at its current price tag of around $70, I'd recommend skipping this 1.5 out of 5 star dud of a game.